So I'm here with Silvia, and this is actually the second time that we're talking about the Disco model and guerrilla translations. And really excited to be doing this as part of the Thriving Network's 8-week course that she was a guest on in the past and is again this time. And so this webinar is really to give us an opportunity to dive quite deep into like the details of how the Disco model works, how Disco.Coop sort of started, and like the really ideology and idea behind what the model stands for. And to then have some time for some Q&A and questions with all of you here in the second half of the session to sort of, figure out what are the really interesting questions to dive in about this model. And then for those of you who are part of the course, you'll actually be able to get even more time with Silvia and to dive into more questions and some nitty-gritty topics. But so just really briefly, a little bit more about Silvia, which is that she's actually an interpreter and a translator that is mainly part of the Guerrilla Media Collective, which is actually an organization using the Disco model, and that actually the Disco model sort of came out of like a real lived applied practice of that. And I think at least a few months ago, your focus was a lot around the sustainability circles and Disco accounting. And generally, you're very passionate about governance models and commoning. So topics that many of us here are really passionate about as well. So again, really pleased to have you here and to really now pass the baton to you to, give us a real overview and deep dive into the model for about like 20-25 minutes. And then we'll open the space for some questions. Take it away, Silvia.
Great, thanks a lot. Thanks for inviting us for the second time already. I'm very happy to be here with you guys. I have some slides, so I'm going to share them on here. Just a second. Since the Disco model can get complicated if this is the first time that you are looking at it. So just a second, I'm looking for my PowerPoint screen. Okay. Can you guys see the Disco.Coop logo? Great. So DISCO is an acronym, actually. It stands for Distributed Cooperative Organization. And it is basically a governance model, a proposal from our organization, which is also called DISCO, to kind of update, in a sense, the original cooperative principles and add in there some of the bodies of theory we have been learning a lot about in our collective, which is guerrilla translation. So I'm going to clarify some of these names. Of course, when you read Disco, this is the first thing you think about, probably. And right now, many dance floors are empty, although in some places they're already starting to open up, which is great news. So DISCO is a distributed cooperative organization, although obviously we make as many Disco music puns and references as we can in the website and in the documentation. But basically, it is, as I was saying, a proposal in order to incorporate different ideas into the cooperative principle. So it's a proposal for work relations, workplaces, work groups. And it brings together peer governance, commoning, ideas around care work and feminist economics, ideas around value and value flows, and different also conceptions of labor, especially in a digital setting, although our idea is to be able to extend Disco principles to any kind of activity, also not strictly digital. So we say it's distributed because it's distributed in the governance aspect, but our aim, it is also to make use of distributed technology. It's a cooperative because as I was saying, it's like an I was gonna say upgrade, probably as a slip of the tongue. We mean it to be like an updated version of cooperatives, and it's an organization, a kind of organization. Obviously, it applies to groups. It takes at least 3 people to disco. It takes 2 to tango, but it takes 3 to disco. Disco was born in the Guerrilla Media Collective. We are best known for the project Guerrilla Translation, but we are currently rebranding because we have realized that we do more things than translating. So these are pictures of us. And the Disco project was born out of our lived practices in guerrilla media. So it is a governance model that we have been codifying for the past 7 years, more or less. And it crystallized in about 2019 into a model that then became its own body of work, the Disco model. In fact, currently the organizations are kind of spinning off because Disco is getting much attention and it requires dedication, and some of us want to keep doing the translation work we were doing before. So it's currently like this kind of transition phase where Disco is becoming its own thing. And I was active in Disco until more or less June this year. I still work with them sometimes, but Disco is currently becoming something bigger and more tech oriented. I'll mention some of that later on. And a bit in the middle, but more a translator because this is my background. But I was very involved in the legal setup of Guerrilla Media Collective, which currently is a cooperative based in Spain because most of us live here. However, internally, we function as a Disco. This was our 2019 meeting where we realized that Disco was something bigger than our own group. I don't know if you can see the whiteboard in the background. There's like a small square that says GT, Guerrilla Translation, a larger one that says GMC, Media Collective, and an even larger one that's a Disco model. And we realized these practices could be codified and extended to other groups. So this is where we get to the Disco principles, the Disco model itself. We have been influenced by the Commons movement and P2P peer governance. In Guerrilla Translation, we have worked with texts from David Bollier. We had the chance to translate things like A Commoner and Free, Fair and Alive, which is his joint work with Silke Helfrich. So a lot of these ideas we have been working on strictly linguistic terms have also been a great source of inspiration for us. I have put here some little summaries. So as you can see on the screen, Commons are self-organized systems stewarded to meet human needs while leveraging the power of networks. Although if you are part of the course, I think you've had the chance to take a deep dive into this. We also draw on open co-ops, so not only cooperative as an organization and as a way of functioning, but also working with the idea of open source and making resources, design, code, materials, or in our case, translations open to a wider community. We work with open value accounting, which is probably what we're going to talk about most next week. Basically, we try to rethink the way we value our own work and the way we distribute the money that comes in from this work. We have the system is a little bit complex, so I'm going to leave it for later because I have specific slides on this. And we have also been inspired greatly by the ideas of feminist economics. We factor in care work as one of our 3 streams of work. This is also a preview of the economic model. This is an image from the book I just mentioned, Free, Fair, and Alive, which, by the way, you can read on the book website, freefairandalive.org. What David and Silke did here was basically make a compendium of common practices. They traveled the world. They identified a lot of things groups of people were doing, the practices of networks in the domains, not only of governance, but also of provisioning, which means their economic activity, their managing of resources. And it's very interesting. So I just left it here. If you guys want to check out, you can find out more in the book website. We definitely have drawn a lot of inspiration for the DISCO model from here. And we have tried to incorporate all this into the classic tradition of cooperatives. So these are the 7 original cooperative principles. As I said, DISCO is a proposal for radical workplace democracy. So we believe that the closest thing to a DISCO is a co-op, but there's something more to DISCOs than just classic co-ops. Classic co-ops have the principles that you can see on screen: open and voluntary membership, democratic member control, economic participation of members, autonomy and independence, education, training and information, cooperation among cooperatives, and concern for community. Co-ops are owned and controlled by workers. Usually they implement the principle of one member, one vote. We have followed very closely developments in the domain of platform co-ops. Of course, a lot of transformations are happening now to work relationships worldwide, and we as a translator team work digitally and distributed geographically. Basically, each one of us is in a different city. So this has greatly affected our way also of experiencing these work relationships. And we incorporate then the principles of feminist economics, P2P, commons, etc. We end up then with another set of 7 principles, which are slightly different from the other ones because they are the 7 DISCO principles. So I'm just going to go through them really quickly, so then we have time for your questions. The DISCO principles are trying, well, the DISCO principles aren't trying, rather a community or a set of communities are trying to implement the DISCO principles, and these are called the DISCO labs. So Guerrilla Media Collective is one of them, as you can see, but there are other ones. There's a community that's focused on wool and the traditional wool working techniques and work with autochthonous sheep breeds, that's laneras from Western Spain. We also have contacts with Cooperation Jackson, with Tatebaes, which is a co-op also focused on social innovation from the Basque Country, tied to the Mondragon group. We are in touch with multi-talented makerspace. In fact, Brian there is part of the DISCO crew. It's a Fab Lab based in Zimbabwe. We have other connections, although they're not on screen, for example, the Immersive Space. And basically, a lot of people are getting in touch because they see DISCO as a possibility for shaping the relationships within their groups in a work setting. The first DISCO principle is values-based accountability, which we often dub as put your effort where your heart is. DISCOs are oriented towards a common good, and this is usually reflected on the statutes, bylaws, so it's made explicit in its constitution, so to say. DISCOs are driven by purpose. In Guerrilla translation, our purpose is to share knowledge and information beyond linguistic barriers, but any group can set their own priorities, of course. The idea is that DISCO is a template that groups can adapt to their own activities. Here we have the laneras, the group I mentioned before, which have the objective of preserving traditional wool working techniques. We also think community governance is important. This has to do with our commons DNA. And the idea is that DISCOs make their decision-making processes open to a wider community. This can include neighbors, clients, users, depending on the DISCO and the activity they are carrying out. It can be a community of backers, supporters, patrons, or it can be people who perform effective and reproductive labor around the DISCO members. Basically, the idea is that you extend decision-making powers to the people who are affected by your activities. DISCOs are also, in all cases, active creators of commons. Commons are basically resources that are collectively managed and also open access. So the idea is that your DISCO can have an activity that is that happens in the market, so to say. You can sell goods and services, or you can, of course, you can do commission work, but some part of your work has to go towards the creation of commons. You can open a part of the work that you do. You can offer pro bono services or help or mentoring to maybe peers or other communities. So this is also an important feature that makes DISCOs different from other kinds of co-ops or communities. There is always a drive to open practices, knowledge, design, code. In our case, it can be translations. In the case of the DISCO project and the DISCO crew themselves, it's the documentation about the model. Open source has a great deal of examples about this. You can share code. You can also share designs, I don't know, for 3D printing, or there's many possibilities. We also have a principle that we think is very, very timely, which is that DISCOs are transnational by nature, or at least they are looking outward. We are big fans of the think global, make local philosophy. And in this case, we also think that DISCOs should be able to connect on a global level with their peers, with other communities that are maybe carrying out similar activities, ideally with other DISCOs as well. Physical production is kept local, of course, but knowledge, resources, documentation can be shared globally. And we believe this is also an important feature for DISCOs in today's world. This is probably the principle that we like to speak about the most, which is care work, because we have a broad definition of care work. For us, care work means the work that keeps the network and its members alive, or rather, the work for the network and its members' well-being. And as such, we have, in our community practices, we have a mutual support conga line, as we call it, which means we have a list of peer support between our members. So we changed that. We used to change that weekly, but that was too short. So now we switch monthly. So for example, each month I have someone else in the team who is in charge of supporting me, which means that we are meant to schedule a call and to talk just about things. It doesn't have to be work, just things that I might be struggling with, things that worry me. And we time this, we count this as work. Of course, I am also supporting someone else because it's like a circle. The thing is This is caring for the well-being of members, but caring for the well-being of the network of the organization includes a set of tasks that are normally performed by managers or administrators in other kinds of organizations. We believe that responding to emails, making, I don't know, updating things on the common calendar and putting the events in, taking notes from meetings, and then, turning them into some kind of intelligible documentation for a wiki or for a blog, making a budget for a translation, updating the monthly complicated Disco accounting spreadsheets, all of these counts as care work too. We had a comic that we like to use, which is about the house chores, because we often compare this kind of care work to sharing a flat. And someone has to tidy up a room, and then when you are tidying up the room, then you find something laying on the floor, and you have to, I don't know, it's a sweater, it's a dirty sweater, and you want to take it to the laundry basket, and then when you go to the laundry basket, you realize it's full. And then, so one task takes you to another. I'm sure you all know this maybe from your own home at some point if you live with other people. So we compare this to our digital space, to our digital workspace. So I don't know, for example, we get a question or a query or I don't know, a translation project inquiry via email. And for this, I go to our messaging platform in order to inform my colleagues, to check who's available to do this work. Then I go to our organizational tool, which in this case is Trello, a Kanban board style. It can be any board, any kind of shared board or platform where you can share information about tasks and assignments. And then I realize that something's missing or something's not updated, and we have to make a decision. So I go to our decision-making platform, which is Lumio. So all of this is also care work, because we are taking care of the network, we are taking care of the collective, and we are making sure it's healthy and it can function on a daily basis. Principle 6 is also one of the heavily economic principles. We have I want to say theory, but it sounds like a bit too much. So basically, we have 3 categories for value. We try to have a taxonomy of sorts of value that reflects the principles that I've already mentioned. So we have livelihood work for commercial work, for our productive commercial activity towards, the outside world, the things that we get paid to translate. We have love work, which in our case is the articles and content and help, sometimes also as interpretation, that we do pro bono. It can be something that we do for another collective because we share their values and because we want to support them. It can be something we publish and make available openly, as we have done for years on the Guerrilla translation website. It can be different things, but it's usually in our case, it's translations that we then circulate with commons licenses open so that everyone can access this knowledge. And we have care work. And we count the 3 of them with a system that we call for now Disco Economics. We have an infographic. I can share this so you guys can have it in the course, and we can speak more in detail about this maybe later or next week. I don't want to go over time too much. The idea is that the value accounting with all these 3 value streams, love work, care work, and livelihood work, will be performed in a much easier way with the software. And we are working together with mycorrhizal software and value flows. You can see Lynn on screen. She's helping us find a community of coders, because this is the next step for the Disco project. Disco has published resources on the model the principles and the economics themselves. We have the Disco Manifesto and the Disco Elements, which this presentation is heavily based on, basically. But the next step for us is to do the pink paper and to be able to produce, or at least kickstart the production of, a digital tool that will help other communities get familiar with the economics of the DISCO model. So if you know any coders or any backers that would be happy to support us, please get in touch. The last principle is actually very similar to the classic co-ops. Discos are primed for federation. Cooperatives are meant to help cooperatives. So this is more or less the same. Discos should get connected and leverage the power of a network, not only inside a disco, but among different discos. For now, there's not so many of us, but Disco and Guerrilla Media Collective work very closely together, and we are trying to help the labs turn into discos and keep these connections among them. This is the Disco Elements. You can find it on the Disco website, which is Disco.Coop. There you can check out all the resources. You can check out our love work translations on guerrillatranslation.org, and you can check out Free, Fair, and Alive, our great inspirational book on the commons on freefairandalive.org. So I hope I didn't go too much over time. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I'll be happy to answer your questions and listen to your comments.
Thank you so much, Silvia. It's always so interesting to hear about this. And I think that one of the elements that always seems most interesting or different is especially this idea of care work, at least for me, when I heard about how you understood care work and what counted within that, it really seemed like a new approach to that. And yeah, I guess, so quick invitation to everyone that if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. You can also unmute yourself in a second if you'd like to jump in with a question. And just maybe as you think about, okay, what do I want to ask? What's most interesting to dive into? I just wanted to kick us off with one question, which is, I guess, a little bit about like this macro development of new types of organizations emerging that are experimenting with these models. And so I was quite curious to hear a little bit from you, Silvia, on what are the biggest challenges that you're seeing right now for organizations that want to try the DISCO model or something similar. Like what are the big barriers that you're seeing, especially as that's being applied in different types of contexts?
Thanks for the question. This is one of the tricky ones. We had a presentation. I don't remember exactly what setting it was. I think it was because we were also guests in the platform co-ops course. And at some point, one of the questions was, don't you think this model applies only to the kind of hipster class people working with their laptops from home? We were like, maybe this is who we are, but we would like this to be something that everyone can use. So I really like the criticism in a way, because it's true that obviously this, for example, transnational networking, the kind of dimensions, the distributed technologies, this is obviously something that may sound alien to some kind of groups. We do find there's a lot of interest in DISCO, as a lot of people are working in distributed teams. I mean, now like working from home and remotely, in part due to the pandemic. We were doing this before the coronavirus outbreak, but so a lot of people are questioning just how they work. And we have also had, for example, in the cultural sector, which is our experience as translators, there is a lot of people are very lonely, in the sense of they are freelancers. They don't really have a lot of support. They are not able to unionize, they're not able to really protect their rights in a work context, in a work environment. And this extends to other kinds of works because I don't know, I am based in Spain, and recently there was a law that was passed in order to regularize the situation of riders, the people who work for Glovo, who work for these kind of companies. So we do see Disco as a way for these people who are kind of left on their own in a way to get together and try to, protect themselves, make a livelihood, take care of each other, which is a really important part of the idea, and try to, carry out their activity in a much more healthy way, in a sense.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It definitely seems like there's so many different areas where this could be applied, and sort of like with different parameters that might need to be adapted. But that definitely seems like a lot of potential for this sort of lone freelancer and networks where there's not enough like of the support system that's there. So I'm curious, do we have questions from everyone else here? Something that you're very curious to ask, knowing that we're going to go much deeper into like the nitty gritty back end of the accounting model and all of that next week. So I think we have Claudia and then Catherine. Go ahead, Claudia.
Yes. Thank you very much, Silvia. I guess, one of the things that I would say is please say more, just say more. Everything is so interesting. But my question would be, do you see yourselves as a social enterprise or an impact businesses? I thought that the principles are much more related to the organization of the internal work among the members, but do you also see, at least, I see at least one of your principles about being, I don't know, there was something about social and sustainability. So do you see I've seen these organizations connected to the social impact or the social enterprise movement in any way?
Shall I go for it, or do we want to listen to other questions?
I would say go for it, and then we'll
okay.
Take the
Thank you
question.
so much, Claudia. This is also a very interesting question, because there's obviously the idea that Disco should apply to any setting and to any economic activity, because we want it to be a form of organization for work purposes. So the thing is that it probably, if we want it to be scalable and adaptable to any kind of activity, we should probably say that it's not 100% social enterprise, but that it should have a social component, which is what we try to say in the principles. So there is always something that you try to share with a wider community. In the case of the Disco.Coop project crew itself, well, Disco is actually setting itself up now legally as a nonprofit, because they want to, promote the use of the Disco model, make it easy for other groups to adopt the Disco model. So this is pretty much a social impact kind of thing. In the translation group, we want to be able to do the work while also making a contribution. So it's not really that we want to change and like reorient our whole activity. We are a nonprofit co-op formally, but this only means that we don't want to make profits, because we are a cooperative and we want to share, redistribute, blah, blah. But the thing is that our contribution is tied to the kind of work that we do. And because we are translators, then this contribution is in the form of open access texts that we curate, that we translate, edit, format, publish online for anyone to read. We promote it on social media. So our idea is that each disco, depending on the expertise they have, the resources they have, and the thing that they are doing, will find their own way to, in a sense, this is essentially just giving back to the community.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the interesting challenges, right? Because I guess one of the things
totally.
we've talked about before is that with translating, there's a certain ease of doing accounting in a way, because you have words and you have something that you're publishing publicly. And I think that's definitely a nut to crack for other areas of what is the right equivalent for that.
In fact, this is something we're discussing right now in the Media Collective, now that we're like trying to rebrand ourselves, because we have found that, you know, we spend time doing social media content just to promote our work. We spend time making, we have people in our network rather that are not purely translators, and their contributions are also not exactly measurable in words because they make illustrations and things like that. So we are also facing this question. In the Disco project, they have created categories and they time track everything they do. So it feels weird talking about Disco in the third person, but I'm kind of not so present anymore. But we were basically just making a list of, okay, so if you are talking to the labs, then this is lab work, because this is our contribution to the community. This is our commons creating work. If you are doing, you know, some grant deliverables, some kind of, you know, funded activity, then this would be the livelihood work. And if you are doing internal care work, you know, taking care of another member or tidying up the inbox or the project, or just maybe stewarding a decision-making process where you make a summary, where you prepare a vote, and where you reach out to everyone, blah, 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 then this is the care work. So you have to think about it, but you can, I mean, the distinction is artificial in a way, but this is also because, I mean, anything can be artificial enough because we are humans just coming up with things and making decisions about them.
Yeah.
So you just decide what your lab work is, you decide what your care work is, you check it. Of course, you have, you know, you should review it and see what kind of contribution you are doing. But basically, it's up to each disco to decide how they want to contribute.
Very interesting. What about Zarko? You have another question.
For sure. I thought Catherine was before me. Did you?
Yeah, I think she dropped off, unfortunately.
Oh, okay.
At least I don't see her here anymore.
Right. Okay. Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Silvia, so much. Just seconding what Claudia said. Like, I can ask a question about every slide that you had. So we can, but just wanted to. I had to prioritize my question. So like, I wanted to ask you about the ownership, right? Like you had a slide, you talked about like member, like obviously traditional co-op member owned versus this, like you include in the decision making and in the ownership, like suppliers and like other stakeholders. And so to me, like this is like mind blowing. I mean, it's hard enough to get anything done just if you just owned by a few people, by members and whatever. But like when you extend it to like the whole community, I think was the phrase that you used. Like I just cannot imagine like what that would even look like. And so maybe could you say more? Could you give an example of how like in this sort of system, like somebody who's not again like a supplier or whatever other examples you get, like how they participate in the decision making process and how they are sort of incorporated in this without being like kind of like the ones quote unquote doing the work.
Thanks, Darko, for your question. This is also one of the I mean, all questions are good questions because this is such a young project that we still have to figure a lot of things out. It made me think of a group we were in touch with. We are still in touch with them. They are called Immersive Space. I just wrote it in the chat. And these guys are developers. They are making you know, this kind of immersive space where you can access, and if you have like the glasses, you can be in a 3D world, and then if you also have the gloves, then you can reach out to a pixel object, and then you will actually like see it in front of you. We had a meeting with them in their Immersive Space. It was very funny because obviously our host had this equipment, we didn't. So we were just like some kind of blob, I don't know, like a round avatar lurking around. Then he was able to do all these cool things. And basically this group wanted to become a disco, and they were very interested in this principle as well, because, and I quote, they wanted to make the project hard to sell. So they wanted to get creative on the ownership. They have founded a cooperative, but they are based in the United States. So obviously they had to look for experts. You know, they got legal advisors that gave them counsel on how to codify these in their bylaws. And we had some meetings with them to just to help them figure out what kind of safeguards they could codify in their co-op, and what types of membership maybe as a way to distribute the decision-making powers, so that the project would be hard to sell, because they wanted to keep it open source. And at the moment there was only 2 or 3 of them. I think it's 3 in the end right now, which is the minimum for a disco. And they were very concerned that the project was getting some attention, and if it grew, basically their business, so to say, is they make a 3D world, you know, an immersive space for people, for other organizations that wanted to use it as a meeting space or for entertainment. You know, I don't really know that much. But their question to us was, how can we make it so that Facebook can't come and buy this off, you know? So in the end, they came up with a kind of membership that includes other stakeholders other than the worker owners of the co-op. This is also something that exists in systems that like community supported agriculture or food co-ops, where you have worker owners, but you also have other kinds of members that are like backers and make a financial contribution, and they can vote in the assembly, but they don't really, maybe they don't perform work, or not all the time, or not all kinds of work. So there's different ways. You have to be creative. In our case, we have different systems for different projects in the translation co-op, I mean. So for one of our larger projects, which was a book, we worked in a network including 4 publishers in Latin America, 1 publisher in Spain. We had a financial backer, we had the authors looped in. So also following the idea of, you know, we translate and then doesn't have to all be printed in Barcelona and shipped off in a plane to, you know, Mexico, Argentina, whatever. So we got together with these publishers, and then they were able to print the books locally. For this process, we looped the authors in, Bollier and Helfrich. And for some of the early disco work, we also had an Lumio. Do you know what Lumio is? It's like a forum basically, but with voting options. It's a decision-making space. We have had several Lumio discussions open to other people, you know, like friends, because we didn't really have a formal name for it just yet, because disco, I mean, we didn't even have the names of the principals, but we knew we wanted to engage a wider community. So we were reaching out to people who have inspired us, who have helped us, who have, you know, connected us with people or groups who have turned out to be important for us in any sense, in any way. And we opened the discussion about the DISCO manifesto to some of these people so they could make their comments, make their contribution, tell us what they thought about the model. So I feel like I've said a lot of things.
Yeah, and I think we have a few more questions as well.
Yeah,
so,
sorry, I can get carried away.
No, it's all really interesting, and there's so much depth to all of it. And I can also see that Catherine has come back, so I want to give her spot back in the queue. And maybe we could do a quick round of the remaining 3 questions from Sarah and Jean-Baptiste, if he still has it, and then you can answer them all together.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Silvia, for this. I mean, my big question is about accounting. So if we're going to talk about it in another forum, that's probably best not to take time on it. So that was my thing. I'm also really interested in, I think, the kind of where the edge is, where the delta is with what you're promoting and what, traditional co-ops have, I think, a lot of issues. But I think, the accounting thing is really my main. So anyway, I'm going to pass, and maybe you can go on to Sarah. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine.
Well, actually, thank you. My question might be a bit too long for the time remaining, because my big question was how you value care work, and especially if it starts to be for large, if the DISCO start to be quite large, and what do you count inside? How do you account, for example, the time spent for coaching other people? Do you rely rather on declaration, or do you have some specific frame to say what is care work, what is not? But it might be a too big question for this end of session.
Well, maybe you can give us a bit of a teaser, Silvia. Some insights and maybe ideas for how to go further. What do you think?
So thank you both. The accounting question is very tricky. So maybe we can dive deep into it next week. I can advance that it's very painful, basically. It's taken us years to just get to a functional Excel sheet that we are about to review again. And this is like one layer of the accounting, because there's the DISCO accounting with, the love work credits and the livelihood and the care work. We scale it for commitment because, some of us are there part-time, others have more time to devote to the collective. We want to be fair in that as well. The thing about care work is that the principle is to distribute care work evenly among all members. So if I work all week for GMC and I put in, I don't know, 2 hours of care work, and the rest of the time I'm translating. This is actually very little care work. Bad example, but we'll go for the 2 hours. Or actually, I'm of the bad ones. So I only put in 2 hours, and then I don't know. My colleague Sarah, she's every day she's talking to people who ask us things, making budgets and invoices, talking to the legal advisors, going into the bank and making the payments, updating our calendar, updating the wiki, which is also part of our commons because the wiki is open, formatting the texts, the love work texts that go on the internet. She's doing a lot of care work. She's doing maybe 5 hours of care work. So there's a formula that makes the average, and if she's contributing more and I'm contributing less, then the Excel sheet basically says, of all of the care work that has been put into the collective in a given time frame, for example, a week or a month, we divide it among all members and we have the share of care work that each person should be contributing. If you are above that threshold, then someone is below the threshold. So then we don't like to say it's a penalty, but it works as a penalty. The person who's been doing less care work then gets a penalty, and some of their allocation is taken from them and then given to the person who's done the most care work. We have to incentivize the care work because it's actually the tasks that we don't like to do. It's like the laundry. You have to do the laundry. Maybe you don't want to, but someone has to do the laundry. So this is basic. Of course, the mutual support is actually the care work that we like to perform because we like to check on each other. And concerning that, when the organization gets big, it should probably spin off, as we have done with Disco. In this case, there was also a difference in focus, in purpose, maybe even, but Discos are supposed to work for up to 10, 15 people tops. If your group is getting too large, then you should probably split into another Disco and federate, and then work together as two separate groups. Obviously, the Disco economics and also the dynamics around care work, which we have a whole lot of, community rhythms and protocols of sorts to connect with each other and to get to know each other better, and then to just keep checking on each other. This works with a level of, interpersonal human trust that is difficult to maintain if the group gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So that's a partial answer to the question. I guess the rest of it will maybe have to happen next week.
Yeah, and I think I really just want to highlight this point about from your experience, the Disco has a certain size and then you federate. I think there's so much in that, in terms of, I guess, wisdom, or it's very radical actually, right? Because if you look at the whole developments around DAOs and even platform co-ops, it's all about scale, and it's about there's no limit to how big we can be somehow. And I just feel one of the things I find really interesting about this model is to really think about what is actually the right size, where all these different elements that require trust, and especially the care work, actually can work. And so I think there's a lot more to maybe reflect and do specifically on that, and rethink how even a network or a community can grow as these little pods of 10 up to 10, 15 people to then connect with each other. So yeah, I think it's a really important topic to highlight. And I also
we have this slogan, it's care before code, because basically with code you can be as big as you want. That's also why we say a lot that Disco is like a template, but then you should take it and adapt it to your own little group, because we think that if it gets too large, then it just, the human trust, because that's also where we are different from DAOs. We can codify things into the tech, but you need the human trust, and we don't want to pretend that's not important. But you need a degree of trust that is only realistic maybe in a smaller group. So yeah, thanks. Thanks a lot.
Wondering if you have any closing words or any also just suggestions if people want to know more, because of course many of the people here are going to be part of our course and are going to have the chance to get to know you more deeply, but some people watching this might also not. So just would be great to maybe understand better, how are the ways to connect more with Disco and Guerrilla Media Collective in the world and learn more.
You can check out all resources on Disco.Coop. If you want to get in touch with the team, then it's easy because the email is hello@Disco.Coop. We'll be happy to get in touch with you. If your interest or your question has more to do with the specific activities of the Translation Collective, then you can also visit guerrillatranslation.org. We are in the process of launching our new website, which is going to be easier guerrillamedia.coop, but it hasn't got live yet. The email, though, is hello@guerrillamedia.coop. So we have all these, it's like a word soup of names, how it doesn't get too complicated. But anyway, if the easiest way to get to know about the Disco model is reaching out to the Disco team and on Disco, hello@disco.coop.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Silvia. And I'm also just putting in the chat the information to the Thriving Networks course if you're not in it, because we are going to keep running cohorts next year. And so hopefully we hope to sort of keep growing this partnership with Disco and Guerrilla Translations to follow along with that and always have them participate. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone who's joined, and thank you, Silvia, for sharing the model and the wisdom. And we're looking forward to much more.
Thank you, guys, and thank you for all the questions. You're always making the most interesting questions.
Thanks, everybody. Feel free to unmute, say goodbye, and
Hi, thank you. Thank you very much.